Welcome,
Megan?
everyone, to another episode. So glad to be here. And as you know, kind of the premise of this whole season is that we have each selected some of our favorite DS9 episodes. And Murphy, after the pilot, this was the first episode chronologically in the series that we've been doing. And a long way home was your selection. So why did you choose this one for us to go over?
Why did I choose Move Along Home? I looked at the selection of stuff that we had, and a lot of episodes that we all chose are important to the series. They move the series along. This episode does none of that. This is I got to admit, I love this episode because it's pure cheese, and when Trek does good cheese, it's so good. And this episode just borders on the ripest. I think it's fantastic. I love the design of the Wadi with their sort of long, weird hair and very, very like early '90s grunge look that they have. I like the design of the sort of maze that they're in. It's a very interesting episode for a lot of reasons. I'll get to it, but yeah, there's a lot of reasons I chose this one. I'm curious to hear what you guys thought of it.
Well, I wanted to push back just a little bit on that it doesn't move the series along. I mean, I agree with you, it didn't do much for the plot. But I think it did
Mm-hmm.
something really important for the characters, especially the main command crew characters, because over the course of the episode, they started blending a lot more. Instead of being Bajoran and Starfleet, they started to come a lot closer, I think, over the course of the episode, especially Major Kira. So I thought that was
Yeah.
a really interesting little thing and kind of a throwaway cheeseball episode, as you're saying. What did you think, Tom?
Mm-hmm.
So I did wonder why you selected this episode. I guess that reason's as good as any for your reasons. I didn't think very much of this episode. Apparently, I was not alone in that, as it was voted the worst DS9 episode at the 50th anniversary Star Trek conference. Having said that, when you get your worst episode over in your first season, you got 6.5 more to go. You got some good stuff coming.
Mm-hmm.
So, on
Yeah.
the upside of that, what I obviously we looked at the premiere episode or the series pilot last time, but here I thought some of the characters that we know and we watch grow and what they grow into as where they were. And I'm going to start at the beginning with that inane effing scene with Cisco and Jake and Don't Look at Girls. Are you kidding me? 14-year-old boy? Yeah, I'm going to look at girls. And then,
Don't
we have
look
to
at
have a
girls
talk.
like a Ferengi would.
Yeah, Dad, we're going to have a talk.
Yeah, I love that
what
he's
talk
getting
is
his
that gonna
dating
be,
advice
Dad?
from Nog, which is just incredible. Yeah.
But, the growth part, though, was at this point, Cisco thinks Nog is a juvenile delinquent, and it may be based on what we saw in the pilot where he was arrested for breaking and entering. But you think about the growth we saw in Nog, and that's what I was focused on, or I was thinking about in that scene. Nog just blossoms. He becomes the first Ferengi to go to the academy. He becomes the first Ferengi to become a Star Trek officer. He literally saves a couple of episodes as we get to season 6 and season 7 during the war. And the Jake Nog friendship and relationship is one that I really cherished in this series. The other thing is, and this may be heretical as well, I loved Wesley Crusher. And I loved every episode he was in. But there are not very many kids in Star Trek, in the Star Trek world. And I don't know if they don't know how to write them in. I don't know if it's a problem with science fiction. I don't know why. But before that, all we had was Wesley. And so here we have Jake, and I'm not sure they knew what to do with him yet. And Jake obviously grows literally in front of our eyes and becomes quite the young man. So that I was thinking about all of that, watching Cisco, thinking about my dad telling me, well, we need to have a talk. Okay, Dad. Yeah. And we saw what you said, Murphy, though, I think it's absolutely spot on, and as well, Megan, when you added, this is the beginning of a 7-season voyage or exploration or journey, and we haven't seen how these characters develop, and since we all know where they're going, we can see where they started. And it was fun to revisit that in a little way, because when I have all of those characters even in my head, even Dr. Bashir, I'm thinking of, season 7, not season 1. I mean, Dr. Bashir can't even remember to wear his dress uniform to First Contact. And
Which
what's
is
more Star Trek
extremely
than you
weird.
have yeah. What's more Star Federation than you have a book on First Contact, what you're supposed to do. So that was sort of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think that was something about that kind of conversation that Sisko was having with Jake about the girls, and then kind of about the influence of Nog. And I thought it was a really interesting contrast to how he was talking about Nog and kind of treating the idea of his son being friends with a Ferengi, contrasted with all of these protocols and all of this respect they were putting towards meeting the Wadi, making first contact. None of that kind of grace or understanding was being extended to the Ferengi child, even though he is a child. I thought that was kind of, you don't really see a whole lot of prejudice in Starfleet, but they definitely have some, and I think it definitely kind of came through in that part, and I thought that was really interesting.
So tell us about the cheese you like, Murphy.
Like I said, Trek does good cheese, and when it does good cheese, it's good. You can look at, TOS had plenty of good cheesy episodes, and TNG has lots and lots of them. But first seasons are usually a lot of stinkers. You're going to find, they're looking to get their footing and see what works. But this is a good one. For me, I like how... I shouldn't say that it's completely useless to the series. You raised some really good points. They're learning how to interact with each other. The characters are trying to figure out who each other are and stuff like that. The interesting thing that I think, too, with the First Contact is that if you look at TNG, First Contact is a big deal. It's, it's diplomacy, and it takes place on the flagship. And here on this little backwater station, First Contact is the captain and 3 other people. And it doesn't go so well. It's very much a middle management, kind of First Contact, where they really have no interest in meeting him, and he just sits at the bar all night. And that goes to show a lot about Sisko being this sort of, he starts off the series as this middle management guy. He's the commander on this little tiny Miranda-class ship, and then he's assigned to this backwater post. I mean, he's definitely not in the upper echelons of Starfleet. And he sort of goes as a character from there, but I like that they sort of emphasize that in this episode quite a bit. Nothing goes right from the outset. But it's a fun one. I mean, it's a fun episode. I like it a lot. Despite the fact that, yes, I do agree it is legit terrible, but it's terrible in a fun way.
Okay,
what about you, Megan?
The hopscotch. Oh yeah, okay. I didn't know this was the worst of all the DS9 episodes, and I don't know if I completely agree with that summation, but okay, it's corny. But I love some of the things that they did with it. And even in their worst episode, I think they did really interesting stuff, especially around characterization. And I noted it particularly when they were playing that hopscotch game, because you had 4 commanding officers, 4 of our main characters, approaching this in completely different ways. Kira is furious. This was not what she signed up for, and she is grumpily going to do what has to be done. Sisko, once he started jumping, he was into it. He loves playing kids' games. He loves being like a kid, being around kids, and it was just, he looked delighted. Dax was really fascinated about
the looks on their
this
faces,
mechanism that was going on, and Julian was super embarrassed. I just love how we got to know so much about these characters who are still pretty new to us in this part in the series. And they just, these little small details revealed so much about who they are and how they would interact with each other. I thought that was delightful.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about the games aspect of this, because I was really intrigued at, number one, the First Contact was, you have games with Quark. And that's literally first thing out of his mouth. Yeah, it's nice to meet you, but you have games. And that's obviously something very important in their culture. And what if playing games was their Bible of first contact? That's sort of one thing I thought about. The second thing was, why not have a culture dedicated to games? We've had cultures dedicated to almost everything else in the entire Star Trek universe. And then, I thought when they pulled out the game, Chalutes, and I love that, it's a mashup of Chutes and Ladders. What better game than that?
Yeah.
But I thought that this was going to introduce us to a side of Quark we hadn't saw, because Quark and Ferengis are very interested in economics and profit, but Quark is a master at games and assessing the odds of anything. And I thought this was going to bring out a level of sophistication in him that we hadn't seen. We almost got there. He explained, I know games. I know risk. I can understand this, and I can understand how we can get them home more quickly. I really wish that had been explored a little bit more, but I thought, for me, that was one of the most exciting parts, because we saw Quark for the first time in a different way than we'd seen him in the other episodes. So I really enjoyed that part of it. And the more I thought about it, the more, why not have games be your first contact? We had some crazy first contacts at TNG. So why not have a culture that's based on games?
What
For
else
those
did you
addicts
Yeah,
out there
I like that
listening,
idea.
Gambling is an addiction.
True.
I do like what you mentioned. I mean,
What
about
else
the,
did you have down, Murphy?
the Wadi and the culture of. What's that?
I was just asking what else you had on the episode.
Oh, I said I like that the Wadi show up. We see the Wadi in total for what, about maybe 20 minutes in the episode without all the game scenes, but they sort of, they talk about their culture and what he brings out, his little like satchel of juice that Quark hates, and their weird obsession with sticks and stuff like that. And really, we only have that one guy. Like, the rest of the Wadi don't say a word throughout the entire episode. There's about 7 or 8 of them, and it's just one guy, just Fallow. He's the only one that speaks for all of them. Except for maybe that little girl that they find when they're playing hopscotch. But that's about it. But you for a race you never see again, they're incredibly memorable. I mean, Lord knows what happens to them later, and it's during the war, but you never hear of the Wadi again, and I've always liked them as a race.
What did you think about the
What about
game
you, Megan?
itself? Well, I was thinking about the game itself, because there was one point, where they were kind of going through the different levels and have increasingly difficult challenges. One part I really liked was when they're in that room with everybody drinking what looked like the champagne and with all the smoke coming around. And I love that Sisko immediately warned everyone of the first rule of Fairyland. Don't eat or drink anything. But of course they had to break that to actually survive the room and get to the next challenge. And I thought that was a fun little thing. I think a lot of humans probably have that deep in their minds from the fairy tales they got when they were younger. Don't eat or drink anything or you'll never get to leave. But they had to break that, maybe because they're dealing with an alien culture. I thought that the game itself was really interesting, and I was curious about how it might play out in a more, say, consensual fashion. Like, are 4 random people always sucked into this game when it's played? Is it always like the 4 highest ranking people around? Like, I was curious as to kind of how that decision was made and how it might play out. But I thought it was really interesting, especially the little bit at the beginning about, only children enter at the top. Everyone else starts at level 2. It does seem like a really big part of their culture, and I'm wondering what kind of, like, ritual or selection goes around it to see who ends up having to play on the interior of the game.
Yeah, as opposed to just getting randomly kidnapped and thrown in there.
Yeah, maybe it's considered like a super fun thing, and getting to play is just as good as being on the outside moving the pieces around.
What about Odo and Preman? I think I got his name right. Can you imagine if we, meaning the Federation or Starfleet, has a security officer of that incompetence in the 7th season, we wouldn't be, Earth would be gone.
I loved how Odo was just kind of bullying everyone around, and it was a really another fun distinction of just like, you all are Federation, I am not, and now we're going to butt heads and see how that goes. And I mean, I think Odo's definitely one of my favorite characters in all of DS9. Odo's amazing.
That has to be one.
And I thought this was a great.
That has
episode.
to be one of the best. That has to be one of the best interactions in the series, where Primon's like, "You can't go barging out of their ship," and Odo's stuttering, "Oh, is that Starfleet policy?" And Primon solemnly being like, "That's right," and then Odo being like, "Well, I'm not in Starfleet, so I'm going anyway." Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. That's the last time you see Primon too. He disappears after that and gets replaced by oh good lord, our friend in the Maquis there that shows up later, whose name escapes me, and it really shouldn't because he's like a main character. But yeah, gets replaced by him. So. But imagine if they kept Primmon all the way through the end of the season.
Yeah. Murphy, in kind of your opening, you said that you could see some parallels or at least some inklings of prior TNG or TOS episodes. Any that really come to mind in either the look, the feel, the playfulness of this episode?
In terms of TNG cheese in the first season with sort of, I don't know, what's that episode where you mentioned Wesley where they end up on that planet full of like, everybody's blonde and has like a bad perm, and Wesley falls into those plants and they're going to kill him, and, Crusher has to save him. It's I forget what the episode's called, but yeah, it's an early one. That's pretty, in terms of playing games and being stuck, there's a TNG episode where Riker, Data, and Worf end up in like a very 1980s casino and have to sort of figure out why they're there and they can't get out, and that's kind of close. But nothing that speaks to me in terms of the sort of visual. I mean, that's a pretty good one, but it's one of the reasons I like this episode is it's just so weird and colorful in so many different ways. It's very unique. There's nothing else that I can kind of compare it to, for its good or bad points. But yeah, it's very interesting, and to me, it also smacks a lot of the way that sets and design are set up in the different series and how that relates to the series themselves. TNG has its color palette and DS9 has the same thing. And the way that the set and design crews sort of built the shows around the look of these sets is really interesting. And that shows in this one a lot. I mean, you go to the Wadi planet or their ship, and it's, lots of ochres and lots of purple and stuff like that. It's a really interesting episode for that early use of color and design in DS9, where usually everything's pretty low light and dark. This is a very sort of bright, kind of weird palette episode, which I kind of dig.
Thinking about it in terms of goofier episodes from earlier seasons, I feel like this episode had really big Loxana Troy energy. And if she had shown up in one of her fabulous outfits to play, she would have fit right in and been an instant hit.
Mm-hmm. Well, being the TOS aficionado, the episode that it brought back or reminded me of actually was Shore Leave. Not because of the silliness, but because of sort of the games that were going on in Shore Leave. And then in terms of character, it was Harry Mudd. The Wadi, the leader of the Wadis wasn't that over the top. But I certainly saw a lot.
He does look a lot like Harry Mudd.
Harry Mudd in that character. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I never put that together, but that's a really good point.
So, it's great to be able to. We've got such great other anthology stories that we can think back and see inspiration. And some of these tropes are going to come round and round and round. So, yeah. What's next, Megan?
Well, I think I've got a kind of final thought on this, and it's something that you got in TV and series in the 90s and into the earlier 2000s that you don't see as much anymore, and that is having seasons that are long enough to have time for a leisurely, character-driven goofball episode. Where you feel like you get to know everyone better, and you get to take a break from just the plot relentlessly driving forward because it has to be squeezed into 10 episodes. And I think that I miss that in television. I think it was really nice to spend time with these characters and on this setting in a really kind of leisurely and pleasant way. So I'm just gonna say maybe it was the worst episode of all of DS9, but I enjoyed it very much.
Well, if you enjoyed it, that's enough for me, Megan. No, and that's a great point. We don't have 22 episode TV series anymore, or 26, whatever it was in the 90s. We have 6 or we have 8.
Yeah.
Or we have something, but we don't have a full season. I remember when I was a kid, there were 17 episodes in the fall and 17 episodes in the spring, and then the summer reruns began. Did we really learn anything new, or did you guys learn anything new from any of these characters? Even for a spark or a moment of growth, or something else that you saw that we're all gonna see grow and flourish down the road?
I think definitely. I think this was one of the first times in the series that we learned that Quark isn't just a mercenary weasel. Like, he's perfectly happy to try and get licensing deals and get all the economic advantage that he can, but he doesn't actually really want to hurt anyone. If he thinks he's going to kill someone, he got down on his hands and knees and begged not to have to kill someone. I thought that was a really, it was a new face for Quark, and he may not like that he's got a squishy center, but he's got a bit of a squishy center. So I really like that, and I loved, kind of as I was saying at the beginning, this was, I think, one of the places where the crews from different places started to gel a little bit more and gain a new respect for each other, which of course is only gonna change over time. What about you, Murphy?
I like that at the end you see Dax and Nerys and Sisko helping each other out of that cave. I like that you see Odo starting to, when he's like, "Don't call me Constable," and he's starting to assert himself more. That sort of shadow of lack of self-confidence that he had about Primmin coming in is starting to wave off. It's definitely a growth episode. You do see a little bit of character interaction in terms of that. Quark definitely does have a squishy center. It's going to come out more and more as the series goes on, but so does Odo, and you'll see that too. And I like it. I mean, I find it a very satisfying little one-off episode. And it's too bad that they never chose to revisit any of the ideas or any of the characters from it. But there's only so much you can do.
I wanted to give a shout out to the model of Deep Space Nine, because right when Odo transported to the Wadi ship, they cut to a view of the Wadi ship docked, and I can remember absolutely loving that model. I loved it in the opening sequences, but when they show it during the show, I just never ceased to feel awe for that model. And on the shot I was referencing, they showed the ship being docked and how universal docking, with even taking ships from the Gamma Quadrant, and whether it's the saloon on the edge of Dodge City or whatever it might be, I love that set. I've always loved that set, and I loved it just as much watching it 2 nights ago for this podcast.
It is amazing in scale. And it's a good point. I hadn't thought about how it was kind of technologically compatible with, ships and vehicles and vessels from an entirely different quadrant. That's a really interesting thought.
So, can we go around for some final thoughts? I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Megan?
Oh, final thoughts. I think I love every time. I think I've said it before in other places. Anytime when Cisco's being a dad, even if it's awkward and even if it's weird and even if he's asking unreasonable things of his child, just the joy that he takes in fatherhood is over the course of this entire series one of my favorite things about him and about the show entirely. So I'll leave on that note. Murphy?
Yeah, again, I mean, one of the main reasons that I really like this episode is it provides a really good, like I said, a really good sense of aesthetics. And when you see, like you mentioned, you see the station from the exterior, you get a really good view of that. You also get really neat views of, there's interesting camera angles in Quarks that we don't often see. There's some really interesting shots of some of the interior of the quarters and of Ops. And you get a sense of that Cardassian architecture that's there again. And I like that. And and I like the way that they actually took the time to develop, an aesthetic for the sets for the Wadi. They could have easily just put it in the cave set on the Paramount backlot, but they chose to build something interesting that was unique and colorful. And I like that. I think it's one of the reasons that the episode is, well, at least enjoyable to me anyway.
Well, my final thoughts are, I'm so glad the three of us are on this podcast because you guys have really changed my entire attitude about this episode. This has been really great to hear not simply your perspectives, but really how you felt 100% Cheese episode actually drove the storyline and should be a part of the oeuvre of DS9, and how we were able to pick parts of it that we will then build on for both characters and storyline down the road, but also use it as a way to retrospect back to some of the things that meant a lot to us in either TNG or TOS. So I can't wait to see where this podcast goes.
Well, I'm excited. Next episode is my selection, Duet. So until next time.
All right, guys.